Homeostasis. Homeostasis is the existence and maintenance of a relatively constant environment within the human body. A small amount of fluid surrounds each body cell. For cells to function normally, the volume, temperature, and chemical content of this fluid, conditions known as variables because of their value can change, must remain within a narrow range. Body temperature is a variable that can increase in a hot environment or decrease in a cold one. Homeostatic mechanisms such as sweating or shivering normally maintain body temperature near an ideal normal value, or set point. Figure 1.4. Note that these mechanisms are not able to maintain body temperature precisely at the set point. Instead, body temperature increases and decreases slightly around the set point to produce a normal range of values. As long as body temperature remains within this normal range, homeostasis is maintained. Keep in mind that the fluctuations are minimal. However, note in figure 1.4 that the normal body temperature range is no more than 1 degree Fahrenheit above or below normal. Our average body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Just as your home thermostat does not keep the air temperature exactly at 75 Fahrenheit at all times, your body temperature does not stay perfectly stable. The organ systems help keep the body's internal environment relatively constant. For example, the digestive, respiratory, and cardiovascular and urinary systems work together so that each cell in the body receives adequate oxygen and nutrients, and waste products do not accumulate to a toxic level. If body fluids deviate from homeostasis, body cells do not function normally and can even die. Diseases disrupt homeostasis and sometimes result in death. Modern medicine attempts to understand disturbances in homeostasis and works to re-establish a normal range of values. Negative feedback. Most of the systems of the body are regulated by negative feedback mechanisms, which maintain homeostasis. Negative means that any deviation from the set point is made smaller or is resisted. Therefore, in a negative feedback mechanism, the response to an original stimulus results in deviation from the set point becoming smaller. An example of important negative feedback mechanisms in the body are those maintaining normal blood pressure. Normal blood pressure is critical for our health because blood pressure helps keep blood vessels is critical to our health because blood vessels helps move blood from the heart to tissues. The blood transports essential materials and to and from the tissues. Because a disruption to normal blood pressure can result in a disease state, maintaining homeostasis through negative feedback is critical activity. Most negative feedback mechanisms have three components: a receptor, which monitors the value of a variable, and two, a control center, which receives information about the variable from the receptor, establishes the set point, and controls the effector, and an effector, which produces responses that change in the value of the variable. A changed variable is a stimulus because it initiates a homeostatic mechanism. Several negative feedback mechanisms regulate blood pressure, and they are described more fully in chapters 20 and 21. Here we describe one of them. Receptors that monitor blood pressure are located within large blood vessels near the heart and the head. A control center in the brain receives signals sent through nerves from the receptors. The control center evaluates the information and sends signals through nerves to the heart. The heart is the effector, and the heart rate increases or decreases in response to signals from the brain. Figure 1.5. If blood pressure increases slightly, receptors detect that change and send the information to the control center in the brain. The control center causes the heart rate to decrease, lowering blood pressure. If blood pressure goes down slightly, the receptors inform the control center, which elevate the heart rate, thereby producing an increase in blood pressure. Figure 1.6. As a result, blood pressure constantly rises and falls within a normal range of values. Although homeostasis is the maintenance of a normal range of value, this does not mean that all variables remain within the same narrow range of values at all times. Sometimes a deviation from the usual range of values can be beneficial. For example, during exercise, the normal range for blood pressure differs from the range under resting conditions, and the blood pressure is significantly elevated. Figure 1.7. Muscle cells require increased oxygen and nutrients and an increased removal of waste products to support their heightened level of activity during exercise. Elevated blood pressure increases delivery of blood to muscles during exercise, thereby increasing the delivery of oxygen, nutrients, and the removal of waste products, ultimately maintaining muscle cell homeostasis. Positive feedback. Positive feedback mechanisms occur when a response to the original stimulus results in the deviation from the set point becoming even greater. At times, this type of response is required to re-achieve homeostasis. For example, during blood loss, a chemical responsible for blood clot formation called thrombin stimulates production of even more thrombin, figure 1.8. In this way, a disruption in homeostasis is resolved through a positive feedback mechanism. What prevents the entire vascular system from clotting? The clot formation process is self-limiting. Eventually, the components needed to form a clot will be depleted in the damaged area, and no more clot material can be formed. Birth is another example of a normally occurring positive feedback mechanism. Near the end of pregnancy, the baby's larger side stretches the uterus. This stretching, especially around the opening of the uterus, stimulates contractions of the uterine muscles. The uterine contractions push the baby against the opening of the uterus and stretch it further. This stimulates additional contractions, which result in additional stretching. This positive feedback sequence ends only when the baby is delivered from the uterus and the stretching stimulus is eliminated. Two basic principles to remember are that 1. Many disease states result from the failure of negative feedback mechanisms to maintain homeostasis, and 2. Some positive feedback mechanisms can be detrimental instead of helpful. One example of a detrimental positive feedback mechanism is inadequate delivery of blood to cardiac heart muscle. Contraction of cardiac muscle generates blood pressure, and the heart pumps blood to itself through a system of blood vessels on the outside of the heart. Just as with other tissues, blood pressure must be maintained to ensure adequate delivery of blood to the cardiac muscle. Following extreme blood loss, blood pressure decreases to the point that the delivery of blood to cardiac muscle is inadequate. As a result, cardiac muscle does not function normally. The heart pumps less blood, which causes the blood pressure to drop even further, a deviation further from the set point. The additional decrease in blood pressure further reduces blood delivery to cardiac muscle, and the heart pumps even less blood, which again decreases the blood pressure. This process self-propagates until the blood pressure is too low to sustain the cardiac muscle, and the heart stops beating, and death results. In this example, we see the deviation from the heart rate set point becoming larger and larger. This is a positive feedback mechanism. Thus, if blood loss were severe, negative feedback mechanisms may not be able to maintain homeostasis, and the positive feedback of ever-decreasing blood pressure can develop. On the other hand, following a moderate amount of blood loss, after donating a pint of blood, negative feedback mechanisms result in the increase in heart rate, which restores blood pressure.